This was the headline in the Boston Globe, the first time that paper covered the Waltham murders. The headline was, "Girlfriend Screamed, They're All Dead. Waltham killings likely not random." On September 11th, 2011, which was the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, 3 young men were murdered in a Boston suburb of Waltham in particularly gruesome fashion. On a dead-end street in a house on a quiet block, these 3 young guys were found with their throats slit. Their bodies were found in 3 different rooms of one house. According to reports at the time, their bodies were essentially staged meticulously at the crime scene. They were all found facing down, with their heads all turned in the same direction, all in different rooms. But their heads were all facing the exact same angle as were their bodies. And all over their bodies was strewn marijuana. Also found in the house, $5,000 in cash, left behind along with the drugs by the killer or the killers. Whoever killed these 3 young men, they were all big, strong guys. Whoever killed them left that money and left those drugs. They carefully and weirdly staged the murder scene, and then they fled. The bodies were discovered the following day when a girlfriend of one of the victims entered the apartment, came upon that horrible scene, and then she ran out into the street screaming, "They're dead, they're dead, they're all dead." From the very beginning, police said publicly, and they told the neighbors, that this was a drug crime. There was no evidence of a break-in. They said those guys were involved in drugs, and that's why they were killed that night in Waltham. But that crime, that grisly triple murder in 2011, remained unsolved, with no reported leads in the case, no evident suspects, no arrests. It remained that way for almost 2 years, until this year, when another young man was killed. This time it was in Orlando, Florida, and this time he was shot to death, we think, by the FBI. After Ibrahim Todashev was killed in the presence of FBI agents and Massachusetts state troopers who were interviewing him in his apartment in Orlando about whether he was connected to the Boston Marathon bombing, after they killed him in his Orlando apartment, anonymous law enforcement officials leaked to the press that before they shot him, Ibrahim Todashev confessed to that horrible and gruesome triple murder in Waltham. Anonymous law enforcement sources said he confessed that he and the older of the 2 Boston Marathon bombing suspects killed those 3 young men in Waltham. So mystery solved? But that was just one leaked piece of information that we learned after Mr. Todashev was shot and killed in Florida. Waltham murder solved. The dead guy / dead guys did that murder. You don't have to worry about that anymore. But everything about the Todashev shooting has been sketchy and self-contradictory. Anonymous law enforcement officials first told the press that Ibrahim Todashev was shot because he attacked an FBI agent with a knife while he was confessing to those Waltham murders. Then the leak changed, so maybe it wasn't that he had a knife so much as it was some other kind of blade. Then within 12 hours of them telling us he either had a knife or some other kind of blade, and that's why he was shot, then 2 law enforcement sources recanted, took back what they said about the knife or the blade. Actually, they said they didn't know what happened at all. Then new anonymous law enforcement sources said, actually, Ibrahim Todashev was totally unarmed when he was shot and killed by law enforcement officers. But maybe he overturned a table during his interrogation, so maybe that's why they killed him? Wait, time for a new leak? No, he didn't overturn a table. He had a pole. No, it was a broomstick. No, it wasn't a broomstick. Maybe it was a broomstick. That was his weapon. That's why he was shot. Because of all this totally contradictory information leaked by law enforcement sources over time, and because there's no official on-the-record information to clean up any of this anonymous junk, this is how reporters have to hedge when they write about the Todashev case. You get leads like this. Some allege that Todashev wielded a knife, a sword, a blade, or a broomstick. Others say he was unarmed. So the FBI shoots and kills somebody in his home in the United States. The first we hear of it, the first we hear of this guy at all, is anonymous law enforcement sources telling us, hey, yeah, we killed this guy, but we also solved the Waltham murders. He did it. He told us. And then we killed him. Story. They offer a bunch of contradictory reasons for why they killed him, but they anonymously are assuring everybody not to worry. He was a murderer anyway. Trust us. He told us he was a murderer. And maybe that's true. Or maybe none of that is true. None of it is known for sure. None of it is on the record. None of it is even provided by named sources. This has just been a baffling and terrible case, all of it. The weirdest denouement ever to the Boston bombing story. Today, finally, though, there was a new revelation, and it was on the record for the first time. Prosecutors in the ongoing Boston Marathon bombing case have now stated on the record that the guy they killed in Florida told them not that he had anything to do with the Waltham murders, but that the Boston bombing suspect did, the one suspect who's already dead. There's no mention in the court filing of Mr. Todashev having confessed to those murders himself, as press reports initially said he had. But at least now, for the first time, according to Boston prosecutors, we have at least hearsay evidence about somebody who might have been involved in that triple killing. Some family members of the Waltham victims have spoken publicly about the lack of official information in this case, even to them as the victims' families. Even with law enforcement anonymously implicating in the crime the guy who they shot in Florida, the Waltham victims' families have criticized law enforcement for killing that guy, especially if he could have shed light on what happened to their loved ones. And if he was responsible, he could have stood trial. As for the friends and loved ones of the guy who was killed in Florida, well, this is the part where it gets even sketchier. One of his friends in Florida was arrested late last month. He was denied a lawyer despite repeatedly asking for one. He was asking for one probably because his friend had been shot and killed by the FBI when he was being questioned with no lawyer present. He's still in custody in Florida. Ibrahim Todashev's girlfriend, who's the other person who lived in the house where he was killed, she gave this interview to Boston Magazine in which she revealed, among other things, that she herself was arrested ahead of her boyfriend being shot, and then on the day the FBI killed him, they moved her into solitary confinement. After giving the Boston Magazine that interview, she was arrested again. She says it's because she talked to the media about the Todashev case. She was then deported. She's now in Moldova. So if you want to chat with her or meet her, that is where she is. She was deported October 11th. This is a story that just does not feel possible. It is not supposed to feel possible, at least in this country. A man gets shot and killed by government agents in his home. There's a total information blackout. Nobody's arrested for killing him. Nobody's charged. Local authorities say they have no jurisdiction. Federal authorities say nothing, except anonymously leaking to the press that the guy they killed was a terrible guy. His friends are harassed and arrested and deported, in part for speaking to the press about it. No government official is ever compelled to tell the public what actually happened. More than 2 months ago, the state attorney for Orange and Osceola counties in Florida finally announced that at least he would investigate what happened in this killing, since the Todashev shooting happened in his jurisdiction in Florida. So far, we have not heard one peep from that investigation. The FBI also says it's conducting an internal investigation into the shooting. Why was this supposedly unarmed lone guy shot maybe up to 7 times during an interview where multiple law enforcement officers were present? An internal FBI investigation might be a comfort to the families of those 3 young men who were murdered to know that the FBI will at some point provide some answers about this man who maybe knew something about this crime. Maybe the FBI will have to explain why they had to kill him before he could say what he knew, before he could stand trial if he himself was implicated in their murders. It might also be a comfort to the Ibrahim Todashev family, who want to know why their son was killed without a trial in the United States if he was indeed a suspect in a murder, a confessed suspect. It might be comforting to know that the FBI is conducting an internal investigation into what went wrong here if we did not also know what tends to happen when the FBI does these type of self-investigations. For the past 2 decades, for 20 years on 150 cases where FBI shot and killed or wounded someone, every single one of those 150 shootings was deemed justified by the FBI's own internal review process. No FBI agent has ever been unjustified in shooting someone for the last 20 years if you ask the FBI. That's what they conclude when they investigate themselves. Maybe the shooting was also justified this time, maybe not. In the meantime, we have to just keep guessing. But at some point, somebody is going to have to say something other than no comment about this case. It is too devastatingly inconclusive and bizarre to do otherwise.